What's up everybody, Chris here from Boss Talk Productions. I'm back with another travel photography tips video. This one coming from my recent trip to Iceland. It's actually my second trip to the island, so visited a few more locations, got a little bit more knowledge, and the big event there, the main goal of the trip was to see the auroras. So I'll give you tips on how to shoot them, all the technical details, all that good stuff. I put together a write-up for Iceland already, but I haven't made a video from my previous trip, so I'm going to be covering everything from the previous trip and everything from this trip. I'm going to be covering logistics, how to get there, how to get around, where to stay, how to get by on a cheap budget as I do, what time to visit. You should honestly visit every season of the year because there's always something different to do and landscapes look different at different times of the year. And of course the locations, where they are, how to get to them, times a day to visit them, and which are the best angles and different composition, technical photography stuff about each location. So let's dive right in. So Iceland has every season that you would expect, and there's different things to do depending on the season. For example, if you go in the summer, you're not going to see snow, but you're going to be able to access the highlands, the inland locations in the country, of course with a 4x4 vehicle, or sometimes you could take a tour with these mega lifted up super trucks to get in there, because you're going to have to cross some rivers and such things. There's plenty to do there in the summer. I pretty much visited at the end of the season where you can access the highlands. Some of them were accessible, but it wasn't really worth it, and it was a little bit raining. So if you go in the summer, everything's going to be green, first of all, and you can access the highlands, so that's a bonus. Going in the fall or autumn, when I visited this second time around, there are some pros and cons to doing that. Most importantly, aurora season starts end of September to March, so you'll be there right when aurora season is kicking off, which is something that a lot of people want to see. There is these nice yellow, orange, red autumn colors that you would expect any part of the country, except in Iceland it mostly is going to be on the moss and small kind of bushes that exist in the area. There are some trees too. I saw some nicely colored yellow trees in some of the areas, so you definitely get that autumn vibe. There might be snow depending where you go, certain altitudes of course where it's colder, but in general you're not going to have any snow on the roads or any of the main locations. And of course you can visit in the winter. I wouldn't suggest going at the peak of winter when there's 24 hours of darkness, because probably the only thing you'll be able to photograph are the auroras. And of course it's going to be extra cold, Iceland already being pretty cold as the name suggests. So if you want to visit in the winter, probably end of January, February is probably the tail end of winter, and you'll get the snowy landscapes, and you'll get a little bit of sun, and you get extra long golden hours from what I hear. My first time visiting was in March. We should have seen auroras, but of course you never really know. You can predict them with the app, but you have to be in the right location, and you don't know what time they come, how long they last. So I actually didn't see any auroras the first time around, which is why I was adamant about seeing them the second time. But we did get some nice locations without snow, and then halfway through our trip it snowed, and we got Kirkjufell and some of the main locations with the before and after with snow and without snow, so that was pretty nice. So another option worth visiting there. So regarding logistics, you're obviously going to fly into the main city, Reykjavik. It's the capital of Iceland. Large part of the population lives there, and there are hotels and hostels to stay at there. But of course you will most likely fly in and then begin your drive around the island. There are two ways of going, obviously, because it's a circle, clockwise or counterclockwise. I would suggest taking a good look at the weather to see what is coming up and make your decision based on that rather than what you want to see first, because my original plan was to go counterclockwise, and as soon as we went halfway through the south we got hit with a huge rainstorm, and it was cloudy and raining, and on hindsight it might have been better if we went the other way, because it was better weather up north and the storm actually moved in the opposite direction. So one thing to keep in mind. My logistic advice tends to lean more to the budget-oriented travelers. So the first time I stayed there, we stayed at a couple of hostels and kind of used that as a home base and drove out to locations. But of course the downside is every time you drive somewhere, you're gonna have to make that same drive back, which in some cases could be 2-3 hours, maybe 4 hours. So it doesn't always work out unless you really need that comfort of staying in a hostel and having a shower. So the second time around, I decided to rent a camper van. You can rent a camper van with fully enclosed interior and the sleeping space inside, or you can get, as I did, an SUV with a tent, rooftop tent. Might be a little bit colder because you're somewhat exposed, and at some of the really windy nights, it was kind of shaking around. To each his own. I preferred the 4x4 vehicle just in case I wanted to visit the highlands, which I didn't actually end up doing. So in the end, the camper van might have been the better choice, but they're all relatively cheaply priced, $500 to $700 range, and then the insurance and all that you have to deal with, whether you want the gravel and the wind and all that protection. And as far as where you can stay with the camper van, there are plenty of campgrounds. You don't have to reserve anything in advance. You just roll up, go to the office during business hours, of course. They have all the facilities you need. They also have small cabins if you want to be a little bit more comfortable. They got spaces for big RVs and stuff. Very convenient, very cheap, in the $20 to $30 range. You actually legally are required to stay in the campgrounds when you have a camper van. But if one night you get caught somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and you just got to pull off the road just behind some bushes or something, they won't exactly be looking for you to give you a ticket. So, you know, don't break the law is what I'm advising, but it's pretty easy to just park somewhere and take a little nap if you need to. The roads are well paved there. The main road that goes around the whole island is called Ring Road. Goes around the whole thing, excluding Snaefellsnes Peninsula, where you'll find Kirkjufell and some other locations that I'll cover. So I would suggest if you're trying to visit most of the locations, a week to 10 days is enough. I did it in 10 days and I did 1.5 loops around the island just because I had to skip some locations due to weather, which is the downside of visiting in the autumn. Some crazy storms that we were escaping from, and I did some long drives. So a week to 10 days is probably the recommended amount of time. Another one of the main roads that people like to visit, very touristy, is called the Golden Circle, where you'll find some of the main locations and waterfalls, the Geysir. It comes straight out of Reykjavik, loops around to all the locations, and if you want to visit like the main touristy spots, that's probably what people do. You can do that in a day or two. There's buses that do it. You don't even have to rent a car for that. Two hard costs that you will not be able to avoid are, of course, gas, which is about $7 to $8 a gallon. Pretty crazy prices, but there really is no other option. You're not going to bring in your own gas. Also food, which there are ways of getting around the restaurants themselves, even the little gas station restaurants. You'll easily spend 15 to 20 bucks each meal. So what I would suggest and what I did is you buy the little camping stove, little burner, sandwiches, anything that won't go bad, which being as cold as it is, the food won't go bad as quickly as if you were camping out in a warm place. So I got a cooler anyways for some perishables. Made sandwiches, a lot of canned food, beans, chili, whatever it takes, you know, to keep the expenses low. And sometimes you just want to eat on the go and keep on driving rather than search out for a restaurant or something and just kind of waste more time doing that. Moving on, we come to the locations. Now there are maps out there. There are guides. I actually bought a map from a famous landscape photographer, Mads Peter Iverson. You can, I'll probably put the link down so you can go find this map because there's very useful links to your Google Maps. You can download it for offline use, and you have pretty much all the well-known plus some locations you might not have heard of all plotted on the map, and you can plan your trip from there. I'm going to cover locations that I personally visited because on my trip I had to skip some due to weather, and there's all kinds of logistical reasons I wasn't able to visit all of them, but I'm going to cover everything that I have first-hand knowledge of, and times a day, how to get there, and all the specifics. So let's dive right in. I'm going to be starting from the capital, Reykjavik, and then moving counterclockwise, since that was just the way I did my trip the second time around. So beginning with the first few locations, they're going to be on the Golden Circle, as I mentioned, the very popular touristy area. We have the one at the furthest end of the road. It's called Gullfoss. It's a very large waterfall. A lot of water vapor, makes a great sunrise shoot. The only tricky part is shooting it and getting a good composition because the waterfall kind of comes off from the distance and then goes down into this gorge, and then the river goes off this way, and there's some areas that are blocked off and you can't walk there anymore because you could slip and because it's dangerous. So you can get a wide shot from the top of the trail, and then somewhere near the bottom the trail goes down to some rocks. You can find an angle with the water going this way, and depending if the sky is lighting up and other factors, how often you want to wipe the camera lens from all the water vapor, you can find a few more angles. I got some close-ups, some good little long expo minimalist type of shots, but our sunrise wasn't really spectacular, so Can't say I was too impressed that morning, but definitely very easy, about an hour and a half drive from Reykjavik, but a very easy spot to visit. Definitely go there early or late because all the tour buses stop by there. A few minutes away from Gullfoss is Geysir, which is a couple of geysers. The one that actually erupts is called Stokksnes. Erupts every 5 to 7 minutes or so. You just stand there with your camera ready, external trigger, you'll see the water dip a little bit before it actually explodes. And the classic angle here is go there during sunrise and you have the sun behind the spray of water lighting it up. You get a nice little backlight there. Drones are prohibited here, even though as tempting as it may be, there's some signs, so you don't want to get in trouble. Another spot on the Golden Circle is a little waterfall called Bruarfoss. It's small but wide. Pretty easy to shoot. There's a bridge that you can shoot from. Getting there is a little bit tricky. The first time I went there on my first trip, we actually took this trail that goes through private property, which I believe has since been closed off. So now you have to park further back and it's a little bit longer of a hike. I don't have specifics on how to get there because I didn't go the second time around, but you can still get there, just a little bit longer of a hike. You can't drive up to almost where it was like last time. There's a classic shot from the bridge, the water flowing under, and you have the sunset in the distance lighting up the sky. Something you've seen on Instagram a few times, probably. A quick mention I want to bring up, just because it's in the vicinity, is a couple of sea stacks by the beach called Reykjanesta. It's actually by the airport. Also nearby are some steam and mud pits. The sea stacks themselves are pretty easy to photograph if you just want a wide shot from basically the parking lot and it's sunrise and you have some color in the background. Otherwise, I tried walking down there and getting some long expo angles, but it's kind of rocky and you don't have the water pulling up to any good spot where you can get a good composition, so I wasn't too satisfied with what I took there. But you go there at the right time and some golden hour light, you might get something good. And plus, it's just right next to the airport, so it's very convenient to visit. As you leave Reykjavik and continue along Ring Road towards the east, the first major waterfalls you're going to hit are Seljalandsfoss and Glufrabui. Glufrabui, I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly, but Seljalandsfoss is fairly well known, very large waterfall, a lot of crowds. You're able to go behind the waterfall and there's a classic shot there where at sunset the sun shines through the waterfall itself and you get a nice backlit water vapor shot. Also depends on the time of year because sometimes the sun is a little too far off this way and you can't get that shot. Not that good at sunrise because of the angle of the mountain. The other waterfall I mentioned, Glufrabui, is a short walk from Seljalandsfoss and you actually walk basically through this river, through a crack in the rock, and there is a couple of rocks here and a small opening, and the waterfall comes basically into this little canyon, this little crevice, and people pretty much line up there to stand on top of the rock and get a photo. It's very wet, there's a lot of water vapor, so you need a weather sealed camera for sure and something to wipe the lens. I've seen some cool shots there with the auroras over, I'm not sure if it was composited, but I saw some cool shots like that. Otherwise, you definitely need to shoot during the day because it's a canyon, so it's not very bright inside. The next spot you'll see moving eastwards is the very famous Skogafoss. Skogafoss is one of the biggest waterfalls in Iceland. It's actually not the biggest, but as it is right off the road, it's definitely one of the most impressive just to walk up to. There's a few classic shots here. If you go during about noon, midday, you'll have the water vapor rising up and the sun will create a rainbow there. Hard to get with all the crowds. I got a bunch of shots and I was planning on cloning people out because I had a perfect, actually double rainbow in my shot, but just kind of got frustrated with the whole process and didn't end up using the photo. But there's that shot. There's also, you take a long lens, stand somewhere near the bottom, and you get a long shot using the lens compression to pretty much show your scale versus the entire waterfall. Prepare to get wet if you get a little too close there. You can definitely take photos from further back. One of the shots that I like is standing by the river that leads down from the waterfall. You just find some rocks that make a nice leading line, get nice and low, wide angle lens, focus stack, and you can get a pretty cool shot there. You can also climb up to the top of the waterfall. There are some angles I guess you can get up there, but nothing that I really like. You're not allowed to fly drones there, but you'll see plenty of drones buzzing around. I'm not sure how strictly they enforce it, but yeah, fly your drones at your own risk there. Skogafoss makes a great sunrise spot. If you get there at the right time of year, it might also work for sunset. be sure to check your Google Earth for to see the angle of the sun for that. A short drive and a walk from Skogafoss is Kvernufoss. Instead of going this way to Skogafoss, you go to the museum parking lot, climb this little fence, and walk through this canyon, and you reach Kvernufoss. It's another waterfall you can walk behind. Might be tricky to get the same angle that you can get at Seljalandsfoss, but you get some cool stuff with the little river leading up to the waterfall in the distance. A little bit more hidden, so the crowds definitely won't be as present as in Skogafoss. Next up, we have probably one of the most famous spots in Iceland, something you'll see definitely everywhere on social media. It's the DC3 Plane Wreck. The DC3 Plane Wreck is actually a 45-minute to 1 hour walk from the parking lot, which is right off the road. I believe back in the day you used to be able to drive all the way up there, but it's been a long time since you were able to do that. So when I went the first time, and I only visited on my first trip, we made the walk. It's closer to an hour, I would say. I went there just in time for sunset. You're going to deal with a lot of crowds while you're there, but I heard that since my first trip, they actually have a shuttle, a large off-road shuttle kind of bus going. I believe the price was about 20 bucks. 20 bucks to save you an hour of walking each way might be worth it. If you get there early, I guess you don't have to do that, but it's one of the options. Once you get there, like I said, there's going to be a lot of people climbing up, taking selfies, so you might have to have a little bit of patience, find your angle. Sunrise or sunset makes a great composition. Also a awesome foreground element for the auroras. I've seen some really cool stuff, light painted the plane, the auroras above, some stuff with a drone flying over making a circle light, all kinds of crazy stuff. The only thing is that once you're out there, you're kind of stuck there, which is why I didn't visit it for the auroras. So you can't really hit two locations in one night. Overall, definitely recommend visiting the DC3, most likely for sunrise, I would say, because there's less likely going to be people there for sunrise than sunset. Reynisfjara is right by the town of Vik. It's a beach with a cave, basalt cliff. The cave is also made out of basalt, and a few sea stacks out on the ocean. It's a long beach, but just gets crazy crowded with people, especially at sunset and during the day. There's shots to be had there, you know, the classic selfie from inside the cave looking out. I mean, people just like stand on the basalt cliffs and just do all kinds of poses all throughout the day and sunset. So definitely try to get there for sunrise if weather allows it. You can actually shoot at both times of the day, but I went there at sunrise my first trip and there was pretty much no one there. Then I went there for sunset on this trip, and it was just like packed full of people. The only angles I could get were of the sea stacks in the distance, some long expos using the volcanic rocks as foreground elements. There's some creative stuff you can do. The downside of the Reynisfjara location is that that specific area in the south is very prone to bad weather. It's very common for it to be overcast or rainy or very windy when you get there, so just look at the forecast and plan accordingly. The good thing is that even if it's overcast, the colors of the location, the really dark black volcanic sand and rocks and the bright white overcast sky make for great black and white photos. So you can still pull something out of the location if you get there in inopportune weather. But nothing beats a nice sunrise colored behind the sea stacks or some of those angles with the basalt cliffs in the cave. Definitely recommend visiting this location. Easy to get to, the parking lot's right there and you walk right up to the beach. And there's actually another side of it from the town of Vik. There's a beach there too, and you can see some of the sea stacks in the distance. I've seen some cool photos using the sea stacks, and the sun happened to be setting behind them, and they were kind of silhouetted. So just kind of look at your Google Earth and see what kind of cool angles you can get there. Also a positive is that drone flying is allowed here. You just have to be careful with the seagulls. I flew my drone the second time I went there, and I was trying to get an orbit of the sea stacks, but there were just seagulls flying around like crazy, getting a little too close to the drone. For one, you don't want to spook the wildlife, and for two, you don't want to lose your drone out in the middle of the ocean. So I would stay closer to the beach and get some angles flying over the coastline, maybe towards the sun, and some angles of the basalt cliffs probably, but you can get some cool drone stuff there for sure. A couple hours down the road, you'll find Svartifoss and Hundafoss. My original plan when I visited this location was to drive up and hike to Svartifoss, which is a basalt cliff waterfall. Really cool from what I saw in the photos, but unfortunately when I went there, the road was closed off. So a little bit further to the main road, there's another small waterfall that you can walk to called Hundafoss. Small uphill hike. definitely kind of underwhelming. You know, nothing really special. Even though I had like the fall colors, the autumn colors there, wasn't really too happy with it. The ideal angle will probably be like a lower angle facing up, but of course you can't access that area right to the bottom of the waterfall. There's only a viewpoint off kind of to the front, to the side, or if you hike all the way around, you'll get somewhat near the top of it, but it's still nothing really photogenic from what I saw. Shot a couple time lapses there, but it was more of like a last minute sunset thing when I arrived. Close by is a glacier, one of many glaciers in Iceland, called Fjalsarlon. I saw this location as I was driving to Hundafoss, and the light was hitting it in just such a way that like everything else was cloudy, and there was just like a little beam of light coming down. So I just had to pull over. You can hike down there to the bottom of the lagoon pretty easily, or there's a hill. I planted my tripods up on the hill, long lens, and I shot some time lapses and a long expo photo close up of one of the little peaks there. Cool little spot. Nothing too special, but pretty easy to get to. And if you see the light hitting something the right way, well, might as well stop. Finally, we have probably one of my favorite locations, Jokusarlon Lagoon and Diamond Beach, and of course the glacier. It's like a trifecta of locations. The lagoon itself, there's a parking lot on that side, and makes a great sunrise shoot. There's big icebergs floating. You got the clouds in the distance. You got the glacier in the distance. Sometimes you get the seals. I got the seals on my third visit on my second trip there. It was a great sunrise. You can get some long expos to smooth out the water. You can't fly drones, but you can see a lot of drones there flying. Obviously, somebody's not stopping them. On the other side of the road, you'll find Diamond Beach. Diamond Beach actually has two parts to it, one on either end of the bridge. One side you'll find, and this is based on my experience, you'll find smaller icebergs, fewer, and makes a great location for a sunrise shoot because the sun rises from the water right there, and you can find the classic shot being finding some of the small icebergs and having the receding water, long expo shot, low angle, sunrise. You can have multiple little icebergs. I've seen a lot of variations. Also a good aurora spot. And that is the east side of the bridge. On the west side of the bridge, you'll find a very similar looking beach. But what I've noticed in this area, you'll either find small and big blocks of ice all bunched together. Not really any angles that I could get on that first trip. However, on my most recent trip, of course, attributing to the tides and the way the ocean works, there were very few but very large blocks of ice. Safe to say, we have found some icebergs. And some small ones here and there, which I managed to use with the auroras as foreground elements. But there were mostly large blocks of ice, which depending what kind of shots you're trying to get, either a big block of ice in the auroras or the sunrise, there's different ways you can work it. So I would definitely recommend visiting both beaches, depending what time of the year and what time of day you're going, to see what will make for a better composition. Also in the area, you'll find, of course, the ice caves. So the ice caves are actually in the glacier itself, but the tours leave from Jokusarlon Lagoon. Different companies offer different tours, different times of day, something you have to look up, but ice cave season technically starts from November till February, I believe. However, when I went there, I found a tour company offering them in beginning of October, which was the last day that I was there on my trip. So I was a little skeptical at first at why this one tour company was offering ice cave tours and the rest of them didn't. They didn't even have it on their calendar. But what I found out when I finally went on that tour was they have begun finding ice caves and sort of expanding them using a chainsaw to like cut them a little bit wider open, make a little pathway, and then the water melting will naturally make that pitted ice cave kind of feature that you'll see in many of the photos. So they're not exactly the same ones that you'll see in a lot of social media photos, but they are still ice caves and you can still get some cool shots. On that same note, most of the photos that you'll see in social media are actually from this one famous ice cave called Crystal Cave, which had apparently many tunnels, many passages, and there were so many cool shots that everybody was getting there. Unfortunately, last year it was lost due to the receding, the melting glacier, for whatever reasons, global warming or otherwise. So it was inaccessible. And apparently last year they didn't have any ice cave tours at all. And then this year they have begun searching for ice caves that are sort of beginning, which is basically the glacier melt, creating a crack, and they would widen it and put in railings and everything else that they did on the ice cave that I visited when I was there. So you still get the ice cave experience. You definitely won't get those exact same crystal ice cave shots that you may have seen on social media. But of course, it's probably just a matter of time until they find an ice cave that is the equivalent or something similar looking. So definitely worth visiting and kind of like doing your research and seeing what kind of ice caves are out there and what kind of tours are they offering. Continuing eastwards, you will hit the very famous location called Stokksnes. Stokksnes is a beach and a small chain of mountains and some black sand dunes. It's a beach of volcanic sand. So you have these black sand dunes with these little bushes, these sea grass, I don't know what they're called, sticking out. Very iconic. You'll see plenty of photos of those on online. And another classic shot is when the water pulls up on the beach, it leaves, depending on the tide, it'll leave like a thin puddle and you get a perfect reflection of the chain of mountains in the back. There's a few angles you can shoot towards the mountains. I also got some cool shots facing the actual sunset, using the sand dunes as foreground elements. It's a sunrise or sunset location, or of course auroras. That was the night I got my most spectacular aurora show. I believe it was a KP5. It had been on the forecast for a while and I was really looking forward to it, so I purposely positioned myself there to see the auroras. I got some awesome time lapses and photos. The main stuff you're going to get is, of course, of those mountains, but if you search around, you might find some compositions if the aurora is going off into the horizon. There's some rocks and seaweed, and if you're creative, maybe light paints your foreground. I tried a few of those shots, but setting the focus was a problem, and I wasn't really happy with anything I got, but I did definitely get the classic shot with the reflection and the mountains. Just a crazy aurora show that night, and Stokksnes is very highly rated. Getting there, you know, it's right off the road, right before this tunnel that continues along Ring Road. Side note, you have to pay cover to get in. I don't know if it was free in the past, but there's a gate and you walk into the gift shop. I believe it's about $15, maybe 10 or 15. It wasn't very expensive at all, especially for what you get there. And then the gate opens and you drive in. There is also a small fake village over by sort of the base of the mountains. Apparently they're going to use it as a movie set. Not sure what movie or when they're filming, but you can stop by and walk around there and visit. It's, you know, an ancient Viking, I would imagine, looking village, and maybe you can get some cool shots there. Maybe it's just good for the gram. Another side note, when you're leaving after hours, the gate actually doesn't open. I did a quick online search while I was stuck there in front of the gate, and it seems like the gate is supposed to open when you drive up close to it, but it wasn't working for me. It wasn't working for the guy also in a car behind me. And what I ended up doing was actually running up to the machine where you purchase tickets to enter Stokksnes, and I bought a ticket to open the gate so I could leave. So I paid twice, but I was on my way to another location for the auroras, so you know, I would pay the price for that. So look into that. I don't know if they fixed it. Maybe it was a malfunction that day or that night only. But overall, yes, definitely worth visiting sunrise or sunset or auroras. Stokksnes was one of my favorite spots. Eystrahorn is a famous location amongst landscape photographers. It's basically a classic chain of mountains on a beach. There's a few angles to get. I was there for sunrise. I heard it's good either way, depending on the time of year and where the sun is. But there's the mountains. There's a lighthouse where you can park, and there's also a small reflective pond in the middle of this sort of peninsula, and I end up using the pond and the reflection as my foreground element, and I got the nice golden light hitting the mountains. So that was my key shot that I got there. I also came there after Stokksnes for the auroras and got a few aurora shots as it was somewhat dying down, so they're not the best ones that I got on the trip. I got some cool stuff on the road though with the car. Just kind of like hero shots for the mini dock that I put together. I don't know, I hear Eystrahorn hyped up very much. Maybe it was the tide or the ocean wasn't very conducive to seascapes, long expo seascapes, but I got some cool shots, but not as cool as what I've heard online. But cool spot to visit to. It's just along Ring Road as you're making your way east. We actually had to skip a few locations on my trip as we were making our first round around the island. And so on our way up to the northeast, there was a small waterfall pretty much right off the road called Folaldafoss. Nothing too impressive, but it's you can get right up to the base of it, right up to the water, get a cool shot facing upwards, long expo. Probably, if I would just guess based on the location, probably more of a sunrise spot because then the sun would hit the waterfall. But either way, I don't know too much about it, but a little cool waterfall that's right there off the road as you're making your way up. A very recently trending location on social media, not necessarily new, but somewhat new in the last few years as far as being able to access it, is Studlagil Canyon. Studlagil Canyon actually has two sides to it. The west side is easily driven up to, and then you walk right down to the edge of this canyon. It's a canyon of very iconic basalt-lined cliffs, and there's some other basalt formations. If you type in Studlagil Canyon, you'll see some classic shots there. But from the west side, you can pretty much only walk down to the edge of the canyon, and you can't get that classic shot that you'll see on a lot of social media and online. The only easy part is you drive up to it. I believe you go to a farm called Grund. The east side is the best side to visit. You actually drive to another farm called Klaustursel, and you park in the parking lot, walk across this bridge, and you make about a 2-hour hike. The path is very obvious. You make your way up the path. There'll be a field. Can't miss it. Very, very iconic basalt cliffs, as I mentioned. And there's a small part where you can walk down close to the water, and I would be very cautious here because I hear that sometimes it's very slippery and it's a fast moving current and it's cold and you really don't want to fall in there. However, when I visited, everything was dry. I mean, even though it was overcast, it wasn't raining. And so I saw some other people as well easily walk down to the water's edge, got that little iconic selfie shot. And there's a strange sulfuric smelling runoff. Adds this kind of pop of orange color. I'm not sure what it is, whether it's safe or not, but it seems fine. Adds a nice little pop of color as your foreground. And it's hard to describe, but you'll see these photos and you use that as a foreground with the stream coming down this way, or you can shoot in the opposite direction. And you can get some interesting looking compositions there, especially because the basalt cliffs are so geometric and you can use the lines in different kind of ways. Additionally, as you're making the hike up there, there is a small waterfall, similar looking to Svartifoss. It's a basalt cliff with the waterfall coming down. You can get some cool shots there. This location is very conducive to drone photography and drone videos. You can, if you're daring enough, fly your drone right through the middle of the canyon. You can get some up high shots. Saw a lot of drones flying there, and I flew my own drone when I was there, and I believe it's still allowed. And also a side note about this location is that it seems like you cross through some private property to get there, even though there's a parking lot and there's a well-made trail. So I would visit this location as soon as possible before something happens and they close it off and it's inaccessible. Interesting fact about this location, by the way, is that it was only created a few years ago because the water level used to be higher, and they built a power plant upstream which diverted some of the water, thus lowering the water level, exposing some of the basalt cliffs, which is why it has only recently been discovered in the last few years, and probably last year or this year has become quite trending on social media. Additionally, a little thing to keep in mind, there's a lot of side notes here, is that the water, you'll see in a lot of the photos, the water is blue. And it makes a very nice contrast with the basalt cliffs and all that. The water is actually only blue certain times of the year. I believe in the summer, there's something that goes on with the power plant or how they're diverting water, and it turns muddy brown. It was muddy brown when I was there, and I believe it's a summer-autumn thing, something to do with what they're doing at the power plant, but the water isn't as photogenic, and it just kind of dulls your composition. So ideally you'd want to visit this spot in the spring or in the winter, because the blue really makes a difference. I mean, you can mess with it in Photoshop, but the blue really makes a difference as far as contrasting for a sunset or a sunrise sky. A large, very iconic waterfall, also featured in the movie Prometheus, the Aliens movie, is called Dettifoss. Dettifoss is on the north of the island. It has two sides to it, an east and a west side, and it's an hour drive to each of them, so you pretty much have to make a decision which one you're going to visit. I inadvertently visited the west side. The view from Prometheus, I believe he eats something and falls into the river, is from the east side, and you can actually get closer to the water on the east side and also not get hit with the very large amount of water vapor, which makes it annoying to shoot time lapses and photos on the west side. It might have just been the wind when I was there, but on hindsight, I would have wanted to visit the east side. I just kind of got confused as I was putting in the directions in the GPS. But like I mentioned, there's the two sides. There's also a couple of waterfalls, one sort of before it and one after it, Selfoss. I believe Selfoss is accessible on the east side, so I wasn't able to visit that. Seen some cool shots there. You know, you can get pretty close to the edge of the waterfall and get some shots as the water is going with Dettifoss in the background. And there's also Hafragilsfoss, another waterfall somewhat up the road. I didn't have time to visit that because I originally was going to stay at Dettifoss for the auroras, and it got clouded over. Dettifoss is primarily a sunset location, just due to the angle. Quite touristy. There's a big parking lot, a lot of tour buses that pull up, but you can get this cool shot up from higher on the path, and you either set your camera up with a timer and walk down there if you want to leave your camera alone, or you can have somebody model or press the shutter button for you, and you walk down to the edge of the path, down by the water, and you can, with the long lens and the lens compression effect, you get the shot of the huge waterfall and the tiny figure for scale. Another little cool shot. A cool location I visited on my second trip was this very large crater called Hverfjall, something like that. It's a very iconic location on the north part of the island as we're continuing our counterclockwise drive. About a 25-minute hike to the top. There's a parking lot at the bottom, and then you got to make the hike to the top. Not that strenuous, a little strenuous if you're late for sunrise and you're trying to make your way up like I did. I ended up putting the drone up and getting some shots and then continuing the hike just because I didn't want to miss that nice golden sunrise light. But once you're up there, there's some tricky angles to get because it's so wide and not very tall. So you can pretty much compose a part of the crater with some mountains in the background or some of the steam pits in the background, or you can just put a drone up and get a wide shot of the whole thing. You kind of have to experiment, mess around with the angles there. Great sunrise, sunset spot as well, I believe. Also for the auroras. It's pretty cold and windy up there, so cover up. But very, very cool location to visit and easy to get to. Also in the area is a large lake called Lake Myvatn. There are lava fields around the edge of the lake, sort of, and there are some sort of sea stacks or large rock formations by the shore of the lake in some areas. And there is also a very iconic lone tree on island. So you can get that classic lone tree on island shot, long expo with the clouds, smooth out the water. I don't think it has a name except for the lone tree, but you definitely can't miss it as you're making your drive around the lake. Those are probably like the 3 iconic shots or iconic locations to visit there, but it's right next to the crater, so definitely worth making a stop by. Continuing on, you reach almost getting to the northeast part. There is a lighthouse called Kalfshamarsviti. A little bit hard to pronounce, I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly, but this is a lighthouse where from the main road, there's a small road going off on this peninsula, and you follow it for about 20 minutes and you reach the lighthouse. It's a very cool, underrated location. You're not going to see many photos of this. I found this from the map from the photographer I mentioned, but there's the lighthouse, a strange looking square lighthouse, and then a just crazy amount of basalt cliffs and columns all over the beach, technically a shore, rocky shoreline, and you just kind of have to walk around there and see and find the angles, and you can get some cool stuff using the basalt cliffs, the basalt rocks as leading lines. Great sunrise or sunset location, though I believe it might lean more towards a sunset because it's facing the west. And unfortunately, when I was there, it was very cloudy and I didn't have anything good going on with the colors in the sky, so I ended up doing one of those moody edits. Really cool, very interesting location, and not something you see out there on the social media webs. Reaching the northwest corner of the island, you have Hvitserkur. It's a very iconic rock formation on the beach in the water. Some people describe it as a dragon, a rhino, a troll. It really depends how active your imagination is, but to me it looks sort of like a dragon or a rhino drinking water. But it's a pretty interesting looking formation. Your composition there is going to differ based on the tide. I believe it is a sunrise or a sunset location. I went there a little bit after sunrise, and it's got a rocky shore, and the tide, as I mentioned, will affect your composition because I've seen some cool shots where at low tide it leaves these pretty cool looking lines in the sand. Works very well as a foreground element for your composition. Unfortunately, when I was there, it was a little bit higher tide, and so I had to settle for a long expo of the water crashing, long expo of the clouds, and kind of blended them together, a little bit of a golden color. It's also a very popular spot, not that difficult to get to, but as soon as you leave the main road, you're going to be on a dirt road for about half an hour. Surprisingly, a lot of people still make it over there. You hike down the cliff. I heard there's another way when it's when it's winter, when it's snowy, you have to go loop around this other path, but we hiked right down the cliff, made it right to the shore. You see the rock formation right there, and makes for a good aurora shot too. I've seen some really cool aurora shots using the rock formation as your focal point and the auroras above. The Westfjords are an interesting part of the island. It's not very densely populated at all. You might see a few farmhouses here or there, and there are a couple key locations here. On my first trip to Iceland, the goal going up there was to see Dynjandi, this large waterfall. I believe it is the tallest waterfall in Iceland. I've seen some really cool shots because you can get right up to the water, and then using perspective and person as scale, you see the huge waterfall. And I really wanted to go there on my first trip, but unfortunately the road up there was snowed over, and without a shovel to dig our way out, it wasn't worth driving over there and risking getting stuck out in the middle of nowhere, because the Westfjords are kind of the middle of nowhere. Show you guys exactly what we're looking at right here. So we turned around and we went to another location in the area. It's a ship called Gardar BA64, a former whaling or fishing vessel that was decommissioned and just planted there on the beach. Makes a great sunset location. Depending on the time of year, there's going to be a different angle behind it. I don't think it works as a sunrise because there's a big mountain and the sun won't really hit the ship until late in the day. Also possibly for auroras might work out. I didn't have any auroras when I was there. But for these two locations alone, I'd say it's worth the trip. The Westfjords are kind of difficult to get to because you're doing a lot of uphill, and it's very steep, very narrow roads, and if it's snowy, even more dangerous. So definitely be aware of the weather conditions before you make the drive up there. But yeah, you got those two iconic locations, and I believe there's also a beach nearby where there's some stuff you can get. I'm not really sure what's there though. Moving on, we have the very famous Snaefellsnes Peninsula. It's basically the peninsula sticks out on the west side of the island. And we have a few locations here. The most famous, of course, is Kirkjufell. If you type in Iceland, photos of Iceland anywhere, it might be one of the first photos that come up. It's the mountain, the large mountain with a waterfall in front of it. I think it was featured in Game of Thrones. And it's a very well-trafficked location. Pretty much everybody pulls up to the parking lot, walks up the path, and then lines their tripod right along the waterfall and gets the same shot. There are some creative angles you can get, either further up or further down. There's a section of waterfalls up here, another section of waterfalls, and then the pond or river that it runs off to, and you can get some cool reflections there. So don't be afraid to experiment and check out some other angles. It makes a great sunrise, sunset, or aurora location. Definitely worth the visit. I've been there. I went there a couple times for sunrise and sunset on my first trip, and then I went there for sunrise on my second trip, trying to get the auroras, which unfortunately we weren't able to get. Also on the peninsula, although on the other side, you'll find the small town of Arnarstapi in a very iconic arch called Gatklettur. It's a very photogenic, strange formation. It's just a rock shaped in an arch. I'm not really sure how it happened. I'm sure there's some geological reason why. You could shoot it from the top of this little platform, or you can walk down and get the nice low angle. I was there for sunrise on my first trip and got some pretty cool shots, long expos with the water pulling up. Nearby, there's also another sort of cliff rock formation. They call it the bridge, I believe, and you can walk and stand on it. I didn't find it when I was there because I was just preoccupied with the arch, but there's another thing to shoot there. You can get some cool drone shots. Just be careful with the birds, of course, and I believe you can also shoot this location for the auroras. It might also make a good aurora foreground element. Now lastly, I want to finish with some tips on shooting the actual aurora, since it was such a big part of my recent trip to Iceland. So the auroras are a very complex phenomenon. I saw a video explaining about how it happens, something to do with the solar rays bouncing off the atmosphere, all this complicated nonsense that might be interesting, but it's not really useful if you're just trying to photograph them. All you need to know is that there are several apps you can use to predict them. The apps will give you the score of the probability of seeing them, and it's on a scale called the KP rating. So anything 3 and above should be visible to the naked eye. 3 will be a little bit faint, but you'll see something in the sky, and with a long exposure on your camera, you'll definitely get them. Anything lower, it's very hit or miss. The app will also give you the cloud formations, which is probably the most important part, because technically there's auroras going on all the time. You can only see them at night, and if it's not a cloudless sky, you're not going to see anything, and If you saw my mini doc, I'll put the link at the end of this video. It was basically a journey of escaping overcast skies and stormy weather to try to find open skies and get the aurora shots, which pretty much only happened on our last few days there. Yeah, look for the KP rating, 3 and above. You should definitely have a decent chance. And then on these cloud maps, you'll see sometimes it's even just a small part of the island. I remember some of the nights where I was shooting, it was literally only a small circle around Diamond Beach or Stokksnes where there was going to be no clouds and we can get the auroras. So pay attention to those two factors. Also, you're going to have to go during aurora season, as I mentioned, which is end of September to March. Probably in the middle of that season, you'll have the highest chances. At each tail end. It's hit and miss. And then as far as the camera settings, I rented a Sony a7S II for its very high dynamic range because I wanted to shoot time lapses and not really have to worry about the having a long shutter speed, because based on how fast the aurora will be moving, you're going to want a faster shutter speed. It's not like shooting the stars where you can get up to 20 or 15 or 30 seconds. With the auroras, you want to keep it as short as possible. You're also going to want a fast lens, f2.8 or better. You can technically do it with an f4, but you're going to be bumping that ISO and you're going to be increasing that shutter speed, and it's not going to look good. So for example, my settings were on the a7S II, f2.8, ISO 25,000, which this camera allows, and shutter speed 4 seconds, which at some points of my shoot at Stokksnes, I had to reduce it to 2 seconds because it was just so blindingly bright. I believe it was the KP5 night. And with those settings, I got my image, which I obviously still edited and did noise reduction in Lightroom, post-processing in LR time-lapse, and finally putting it together in After Effects, which on top of the noise reduction I already did in Lightroom, I added a plugin called Neat Video, which cleaned up perfectly every last little bit of noise and created a perfectly smooth, sharp image of the auroras moving. Additionally, I shot time lapses on my regular time-lapse camera, the Sony a6300, which didn't have the ISO, the dynamic range, and the ISO tolerance that the a7S II had. So my settings on this camera were f2.8 or f2, depending on which lens I used, ISO 6400. Sometimes I experimented with 3200, but mainly 6400. And a shutter speed of about 5 to 10 seconds at some points. So with the longer shutter speed, you'll definitely get the auroras, but you'll get a little bit more of a blur. You won't get the nicely defined tentacles, or I don't know what you call them, of the auroras. So try to get a camera with a good dynamic range, high ISO rating. I'll put some examples of my time lapses here, something you're gonna have to experiment with, but those are some good settings that you can start and kind of run with and experiment if you have faster glass or a better ISO camera than I had. That wraps up my travel photography tips guide for Iceland. If you have any comments or questions, leave them below. Try to cover as much as I could based on my own personal experience. There's a lot of information out there, but Iceland is one of those places. It's my favorite place to visit for photography, and it's definitely worth multiple visits. I plan to go at least once a year until I can visit at every season, because it's just so different. It's a completely different place, all the locations, different weather, different lighting, snow or no snow, autumn colors or summer colors. It's just a very amazing, epic place. I describe it as a photographer's playground, a photographer's theme park, because you don't experience this density and variety of locations in such a small place. So once again, thanks for watching. I'm going to put links to the final mini doc that I made and the behind the scenes vlog, so you can check out the kind of work that I was doing out there, and I'll see you guys in the next video.